So, welcome everybody. I'm so excited. I love having this conversation because there's not enough time, grant money, or community energy to just keep doing the same old without getting really good outcomes. And so, environmental strategies are that secret sauce that get us really where we want to go in communities. And you know what? I spend 99% of my time with or in communities, and it's so easy to get busy and to take our eye off of environmental strategies. So, whether or not this is a new concept to you, or if you've been, and I see some names on this call, you guys have been in the game for a while, think about how can I take something from today back to my coalition? Because if our coalitions don't have the tools to understand how to be effective in prevention, it's like pushing a boulder uphill to do environmental strategy. So the other thing is, and I love the talk of mentors, we all learn from each other. And so we will learn from the folks in the room today. So please use that chat box to contribute, to ask questions, to make comments, and Carlton will shout them all out. So here's a familiar prevention story. Students leave a strong vaping presentation, and then on the way home, one student stops by a nearby store and buys a vape. The presentation may have worked. It may have been the best presentation in the whole world, could have had great pre and post, but the environment didn't change. And that's really where our story begins, is how do we look at what's happening in our environment? So where are you starting today? In the chat box, just type A, B, C, or D. A, environmental strategies is mostly new to me. B, I understand the idea of environmental strategies, but need practice applying it, in which case you've come to the right place. C, I use environmental strategies in some of my work. D, I'm comfortable helping others apply them.
Dorothy, they're coming in fast and furious. I don't think that there's a huge preference, probably between B and C, but they're all over the spectrum here. So it looks like we have a number of folks that have had that use environmental strategies in their work, but still others that are looking for more information.
Awesome. And you know what? That is reflective of our work. So I see some B's. I understand the idea, but need practice applying it. So good. This is practice. I use environmental strategies in some of my work. You know what we're going to do today is we are going to look at environmental strategies through a couple of lenses. One of the, I've been saying this for years. One of the most overused terms in our field is evidence-based strategies. Like we use that term and people are like, yeah, well, it's evidence-based. And I don't know if people necessarily know what that means. And there's a million different definitions. We also do the same with environmental strategies. Like, what are we really talking with environmental strategies? And a lot of times people are like, environmental strategies, well, I can't lobby, I can't do policy, I can't do environmental strategies. There's a lot to environmental strategies. So we're going to look at how we define them today. Yes, the jargon is something else. It's like it's our own language, isn't it? So let's sort of define them, look at the lenses. And here's the thing, depending on your funder, you may be looking at environmental strategies through different definitions. The concepts are all the same, but they're framed a little bit differently. So let's dive in. And thank you for using the chat box, because that's where the learning gets rich. So environments shapes behaviors. And I love the concept of our work is to create an environment where the easy choice is the healthy choice. So I remember I have two young adult daughters, but I had a daughter in 11th grade, and one Friday night she looked at me and she said, Mom, even if I wanted to use alcohol, I wouldn't know where to find it. And I thought, okay, that's good, because that means there's an environment where the easy choice for her is not to choose alcohol. She's still alcohol free because the environment wasn't conducive. She didn't know where the parties were that were providing alcohol. She didn't know the stores that she could go to purchase it. She didn't know what friends were using it. That was an example of an environment where the easy choice is the healthy choice. And that's really what we're talking about with the public health approach. And if you've gone through any training, you always hear us talk about the public health approach. It's the cornerstone of our work. Well, why? Because it talks about the environment. And so this is the public health approach. It's also known as the epidemiological triangle: the agent, the host, and the environment. So in my little example, the agent would have been alcohol, the host would have been my teenage daughter, and the environment would have been the context where she would have been able to come in control with alcohol, right? So in that example, there was no environment where she could find the agent, which was alcohol. And so in our work, we want to address all three. We want to address the host. So we want to make sure that we've got good programs and services and supports for individuals. We also want to look at what the substance is, whatever that is, if it's alcohol, if it's nicotine, if it's an emerging issue like some of the hemp derivatives. We also want to look at the environment. That's the public health approach, the epidemiological triangle. And that's super academic. If there's one analogy that I use, I'm going to say almost daily in my life, it's the frog in the pond. I love this. I love using this example or this analogy. So if I had a frog pond in my backyard and every morning I went down and I had a coffee and I looked at my frogs, I love my frogs. They're croaking, they're on their lily pads, they're in a beautiful pond. Just made my day. I love my frogs. And one day I go down and the water is cloudy and the frogs are croaking not in a good way. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to get the frogs out of that yucky water, right? And I'm going to test the water. And I love this because this is a beautiful way to talk about the public health approach. We want to make sure that we've got healthy individuals, but we also want to make sure. And is that an African dwarf frog? Okay. So now that's going to be part of my story because that's the photo I always use. Thank you. So in this scenario where the African dwarf frog is looking healthy, I love my African dwarf. Like that's now part of the story. But oh, it's not. Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to get a picture of an African dwarf frog because now I'm dying to know what it is. But here's the thing. We often spend our time making sure that we're doing service. So think about youth, right? That's most of our work. And why? Because the vast majority of folks that develop a substance use disorder at any part in the lifespan begin using in adolescence or pre-adolescence. It's at its heart, it's really a pediatric disease. So we often, when we're looking at prevention, we're looking at delaying the onset of substance use among youth because that's giving them the strongest start. So we want to make sure that we've got healthy youth. We want to make sure that we've got those programs and services, but we don't want them to live in a community where it's easier for them to find marijuana than it is for them to find a new notebook, right? We want to make sure that we're looking at a healthy frog, but we also want to look at a healthy pond. And I love this because this is a really great way to talk to your coalitions about environmental strategies. And I've even done this where I've trained, and I'll talk about the frog in the pond, and then I'll have coalitions draft on chart paper the strategies that they're doing, everything they're doing. And I'll say, okay, is that a frog pond? Is it a frog strategy? Is that a pond strategy? We want a balance of both. We want to make sure we've got healthy frogs. We also want to make sure that we're working on a healthy pond, which is the story of environmental strategies. So environmental strategies can reach people who never attend a program. I love it. I was doing a training once and I said, can anybody define an environmental strategy? And someone raised their hand and said, an environmental strategy, you're going to love this, Carlton. An environmental strategy is a strategy that impacts you whether you need it or not. It is, right? It does, whether you need it or not. If it's going to impact everybody in the environment. It can reduce risk before an individual decision is made. It can change access, availability, norms, and practices in the community. And here's the thing. Once we've changed the environment, we've locked in that change, then we can not be as dependent on that grant funding or keep doing the same thing over and over again because we've locked in a change to the environment. And that's why they're so powerful. And that's why there's such an emphasis on them. And so the public health model helps us to go beyond. And I'm going to say, when I did this slide, I was like, we don't only ask right now, why did this person choose? And we look at all the factors, but it's not just individual choice. It's what made that substance or agent easy to find, to buy, to share, and how was it normalized? Those are those factors in the environment where the agent and the host collide. And that's what we want to look at with environmental strategies. So, what is environmental prevention? And I'm just setting the stage, and then we're going to ask you to walk through some scenarios so we can practice it. So, environmental prevention changes conditions that shape behavior. So, not just individual knowledge or skills. So, examples of environmental prevention are availability, access, promotion, how much are we seeing the messaging, price, practice, what is the normal general practice, rules, enforcement. And it really helps enforce the staying power of prevention. It complements education and it goes beyond it. And it's important for me to say right now that this is not an emphasis on we don't need education. I always say, I think of it as in education tills the soil, right? It tills the soil for behavior change. We need that education because it's the foundation, and we need the environmental strategies to move towards behavior change. So it's never an either or, it's always an and. We want to do individual strategies such as education. We're going to get into this a little bit deeper. And we want to say, how do we change the environment? So going back to the frog in the pond, we always want to have frog strategies. We want to make sure we've got healthy frogs, and we want to make sure that we've got a healthy pond. Never either or, always and. So environmental strategies include a wide variety of things, and we're going to look at this through a number of lenses. So it could be organizational retail practices. So for example, are retailers checking ID? That's an example of a retail practice. Access and availability. So that could be kids are able to get nicotine or prescription drugs or whatever the substance is in the bathrooms at school. Promotion, price, and incentives. We see this, I often see this in college towns where we see like huge drink specials and alcohol advertising everywhere. Physical and digital settings. So how is the physical environment designed? And then rules, procedures, policies, and enforcement. And what's really important for us to understand, and again, I said it earlier and I'm going to say it again, environmental strategies is not synonymous only with policy. Environmental strategies does not mean that you have to go out and start doing policy work. Your coalition may not be ready for that. You may not be ready for that, but you are always ready for environmental strategies, which includes policy work, but it's much, much more than just passing policy. I hear it. Look, if I had a nickel for every time I heard somebody say, our coalition can't lobby, we can't do environmental strategies, Mom would have a Lamborghini in the driveway. I'm just saying. Now, there's lots of ways that we can practice environmental strategies. It does mean that we want to pass policy as well, but that's not the be all and end all. And Carlton, I'm going to turn this over to you to talk a little bit more about this exact topic.
Thanks, Dorothy. And again, I love when you present on this topic. It really helps to frame how we ought to be thinking about the work that we're doing. I really wanted to take a moment to just kind of have an infomercial, if you will, kind of around the relationship and the relevance of this policy conversation that you just ended us with, right? The basic thing that I want to say is simply this, that environmental strategies and policy advocacy aren't two separate lanes either. They're really a part of the same public health pathway. That's kind of what it is that I want to emphasize here. And so it really starts with naming the specific local condition. Dorothy has spent a little bit of time really helping us to understand that. But I love what she said. In most cases, when we identify our local condition, we're also actually identifying an actual policy question. She mentioned this. For example, she talked about when we are saying youth vaping is a problem, we're not just saying youth vaping is a problem. We are indeed asking what made the product easy to find, what made the product easy to purchase, what made the product easy to become normalized within the context of our specific situations. And so it is a part of the same pathway. It is also a very effective lever for environmental change. And so effective advocacy really helps us to engage and educate our partners within our communities. It helps us to tell our story utilizing data. It helps us to make sure that we're engaging folks who actually have some influence over the conditions that we're actually trying to do something about. And so I really want to say, and thank you, Amber. This is exactly what I was leading to. So I really want to make sure that when we think about environmental strategies, understand that policy advocacy is a skill set that we ought to be developing and nurturing within the context of the work that we do. And that's why I want to point you to the Southeast PTTC's policy curriculum. And Amber just puts a link in the chat about this. It really helps prevention professionals from going from the kind of foundational learning of policy to really how to build upon that and become readiness builders within what it is that we are trying to achieve and do. I want to point out the fact that we have an upcoming webinar that's going to happen on August 18th that I would invite you to look for more information. But it really is a simple message right now. As Dorothy is kind of taking us through the scenarios, right, all around environmental strategies and the importance of those environmental strategies. Keep asking yourselves, what's the local condition that we're really addressing here? Who has influence over it? What could be changed and what might require some policy, either a capital P or lowercase p policy efforts? Because again, they're all part of the same pathway. And so, Dorothy, while policy is not synonymous with environmental change exclusively. It is something that all of our folks should be aware of as a tool and a lever for helping to make sure that the environmental strategies that you're going to introduce them to can be that much more effective.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good point. And we do want to get to, I always think about the policy, whether it be a formal or informal policy. And I'm so glad you're doing a whole policy training. I just don't want people, and I don't want people to be scared of environmental strategies because they think that it's jumping into the deep end of the pool, right? And I think that there's a couple of lenses that we're going to look at for environmental strategies that I think can help sort of show that sort of continuum of environmental prevention. Because I don't know about everyone else, but when I first started, so I know we got folks that have been around for a long time. One of the reasons why coalitions do direct service, tabling events, programs, and education and awareness, because they're very important, A, and B, they're easier to sort of grasp your fingers around. I can do a tabling event. I know what I'm going to do when I go in and talk to a group of, and it's very important. Sometimes environmental strategies feels a little bit more nebulous, but that's where the science comes in. And so all of that is great. So there's a couple of frameworks that, as I look at environmental strategies, there's a couple of frameworks to look at environmental strategies. So one is PSE. So public health folks, they use that term PSE all the time. PSE, policy, systems, and environmental change. And that means that we're moving from individual strategies to environmental to policy.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're looking at. So environmental strategies doesn't mean that you need to necessarily pass a policy. It might mean you need to enforce an existing policy. I've served on the school board in my community for 2 terms, and I was the chair of the policy committee. I passed lots of policies at the school. I'll tell you, we got some of the best alcohol and drug policies there are. Doesn't mean they were enforced. And in some cases, it wasn't enforced because the administration didn't care. It was enforced because the administration didn't have the capacity. So environmental strategies are looking at what rules and laws are already in place that aren't being enforced for whatever reason. That is an example of environmental strategy. And sometimes then we need to look at laws and ordinances. It's a continuum. This, my dear friends, is a money slide. I see people talk about these two
Yeah.
concepts all the time. And if you're funded for prevention, if you're funded through the Drug-Free Community Support Program, for example, you're going to be very familiar with what's on the left. Those are the 7 strategies for community change. If you have funding through SAMHSA, through the block grant or through Partnership for Success or any other number SAMHSA, you're going to be very familiar with the 6 prevention strategies. These guys are cousins. They're not identical twins, but they are cousins. So the way that I look at, so what makes them similar? First of all, what they're both looking at is how we make sure that we have both environmental, frog, and pond strategies in our approach. So looking at the blue chart first, that's the 7 strategies for community change. They're also known as CADCA's 7 strategies for community change, so you may know them as either. So we're looking at providing information, enhancing skills, providing support. Those are all designed to target individuals. Enhancing skills, changing consequences, physical design, modifying policy, those are all changing the pond, the environment. The way I look at those 7 strategies for community change is they're really designed to be used as a unit mapped to a local condition. A unit mapped to a local condition. That's going to give you enough dosage. We're going to walk through some scenarios. SAMHSA's 6 CSAP prevention strategies are really broad categories. Within each one of these categories, we could do and have done trainings on each one of these categories, because within each one of these categories, there's a lot within each one of information dissemination, what the evidence base is for that, what some best practice are for that, all the way down. But where they are common is they are ensuring that coalitions are not just working on, for example, information dissemination, which is individual strategies. They're also looking at things like community-based processes, environmental approaches. Those are environmental strategies. And so both of these are ways of looking at, is the work we're doing capturing both frog and pond environments and individuals? So that's another way to look at it. This is the way that when I work like in communities with coalitions, I've started looking at this prevention strategy continuum. Because, and as we go through some scenarios, I hope this is useful to you too. Please feel free to use it as you're doing your next community mapping, because I love it when you're looking at strategies. So we want individual strategies such as education and awareness, right? That's going to till the soil for behavior change. We want to look at that environmental level stuff. How do we change conditions in the community? And then how do we lock it in with laws, regulations, and rules? So it's a continuum. Here's the thing. It's a continuum, not a hierarchy. A hierarchy would make one of them more important than the other. It's a continuum. They're all really important, and we want them all. So it's never an either or, it's always an and. Here's an example. So if we're looking at education, individual level, we do want to do some school-based lessons. We may want to do some youth media campaigns or parent education nights. Those are all really, Salvador, you're going to love the last half of this webinar because there's lots of examples. Those are individual level strategies, but those are important, but we don't want to stop there. We also want to look at how do we make sure that the environment is healthy, that we're creating an environment where the easy choice is the healthy choice. Well, we're going to make sure that we're looking at that alcohol, tobacco, and other drug policy and that we're enforcing it. We're doing things like compliance checks. Don't need to pass a law there that we already know it's illegal to sell to underage. And we want to do things like responsible beverage server training. Now that's a program, but it changes the environment in that it equips servers with the right skills to make sure that things like access is not an issue in the community. And then we want to look at policy level things like, what about alcohol zoning laws? Where are we with our social host ordinance? Well, maybe we can look at passing a law or ordinance or even an organizational policy where there is a requirement for ID checks. So this is really a continuum. We want to do individual, environmental, and policy. So this goes back to what you said, Carlton. We do want to do policy, but we don't want to think that's the only piece of environmental strategy. So there's that continuum of strategies.
I often think about it in terms of, remember we used to use the metaphor, the analogy of looking at a fraction, looking at the numerator versus the denominator.
Yes,
We have those programs. What you're really talking about here is that we have programs that are really numerator kind of impact levels, right? Which is part of the denominator representing the whole, the entirety of the population, and what our goals are, what we're choosing to do, what we know is effective is that we are constantly needing to look at the denominator, what's going to have the impact and the effect. And we need to know the difference between both.
I love that. And yeah, that's still one of my favorite things to do for communities. And I would recommend for if you run a coalition or you're going to want to have this conversation at your coalition meeting, really quick, easy example that I learned from Carlton. It's very powerful. Is just get a chart paper and say, and go from individual over to say, if we do a parent night, how many parents are going to be there? And people will say, usually they groan and they'll 50. If we do life skills training, how many kids are we going to get in the school district? 150. And so we put that all on the top. Then we put a line and we say, how many people live in this community? 200,000. Okay. And then let's go up to the top and say, okay, if we're going to hit 50 and 150 and 20 for this event and 30 for this, how long is it going to take before we actually change the behaviors of that entire community? That's the denominator. And I love that way of looking at it because it's one of those things that people go, oh yeah, now I see why we need to do that law, because we're going to get everybody all at once. That's where we start to see those population level or community level changes. That's why environmental strategies are the secret sauce. I love that, Carlton.
I love what you said. Environmental strategies impacts you whether you want it to or not.
Right?
Incredible.
I love that.
Incredible.
I love that because I lived in a couple of states when they went smoke free, and I'm not a smoker, but it increased the number of, it impacted me because then I had more places I could take my kids to dinner where we weren't being impacted by secondhand smoke. So it impacted me whether I was a smoker or not. Love those environmental strategies. So let's just ask, and again, I can see as some of them come in, Carlton, but I'll ask you to. So I stands for individual, E stands for environmental, P stands for policy. A school lesson on alcohol, would that be individual, environmental, or policy? Individual, environmental, or policy? Let's have fun with it.
Here's where we find out if you've been listening or doing other work. Okay, we got a bunch of individuals coming in.
All right, so we got some overachievers in the room. Easy peasy. All right, retailer age compliance checks. Retailer compliance checks.
Retailer compliance checks are coming in, a bunch of E's, 1P.
Well, I'm going to say the E's have it. I'm not going to say the P is exactly wrong, though, because there is a policy. It's not being enforced. All right, what about responsible beverage service, also known as RBS, things like tips training? RBS, responsible beverage service at a community event. This I could take two answers for. E's, I'm seeing lots of E. That's an environmental strategy. Alice, you're right. That could be an E or a P. Oh, Chris, I can see how that would be an environmental strategy too. So your people had a good, strong cup of coffee this morning. So here's the thing. Yes, I would go to E. It's an environmental strategy, but it could be a P if we turn that into a policy that at community events, it's required now that all community events have responsible beverage server training. So I could take an E or a P on that. Social host ordinance, this one's an easy one. Social P, absolutely. Look, fun fact, anything that has law or ordinance in the name, we got a good indicator. All right, good. Last one, a parent awareness campaign.
Got
So
I's and some E's with the I's.
So here's the thing with awareness campaigns is I'm going to say check with your funder, because I work in lots of different states. In some states, they consider awareness campaigns to be an environmental strategy. Other schools of thought consider campaigns to be an individual strategy. So depending on who your funder is, who your partners are, it could be an individual or an environmental. It's not going to be a policy strategy. But I love this because you all know what we're exactly talking about here. Individual strategies, environmental strategies, and policy. Perfect. The continuum matters. We need to have all three. And here's the thing, sometimes I hear we talk about environmental strategies a lot more than we really talk about. We need to have those individual strategies because most people default to individual strategies, but they're equally as important. And sometimes I feel guilty when I'm focusing on policy and environmental strategies with folks, and I feel like I'm like inherent in what I'm saying is that I don't value education and awareness. I do. It absolutely is important. And we need to take it to the next level. And that's where those environmental strategies come in. So we want to make sure that we've got an equipped group of people. They have the knowledge and attitudes and skills. Those are individual strategies. We want to also look at things like access, like where is that context where the host and the agent are coming into play? And then how do we lock in a healthy environment through policies, through laws? And so that distinction helps us see the activities that we can and what we cannot change. And I'm going to say, we always can do individual, we can move towards environmental. Sometimes it's going to take a little bit of time to increase readiness to do policy, but that doesn't mean that we can't do environmental strategies. Here is my second money slide of the session. A strategy needs a local condition. A local condition is a behavior. A local condition is the link between what our data are telling us is happening in the community and the right strategies to do in our community. So a local condition is specific. We can describe, it's a behavior, not parents think it's a rite of passage, but a behavior. Because parents think it's a rite of passage, they're letting kids drink around the bonfire in the backyard. It names where, when, or whom. Somebody has influence over it, so we can change it. So I was just doing a session not too long ago, and I asked folks, what is the local condition you're working on? And that's always, Morgan, hey Morgan, yes, take a picture. Can I take a picture of it? I can't take a picture of a parent's thinking, that's a thought bubble, but I can take a picture of the kids around the bonfire in the backyard, right? And so when I ask, and so you will on any given day see me asking a coalition, what's your local condition? And it's a loaded question, but not with judgment. It's a loaded question because can you answer what the local condition is? I often hear things like, well, we're working on vaping. That's a problem. But what within vaping are we looking at? Vaping is a problem is not yet a local condition. It's not wrong. We want to look at vaping, but we need to unpack it. What is that behavior that's happening within that broad problem? So, which statement could guide us to our activities? Vaping is a problem in our community, A. B, young people can buy vapes. Or C, 4 retailers near the high school sold to underage buyers doing recent compliance checks. Which one of these is, yeah, okay, y'all, C. Okay. Just gonna say, I made that one easy for y'all. Yes. But you know what, can't you see it? I can see in my mind's eye, I can see the retailers. I can see it's near the high school. That's a local condition. So vaping is a problem. That's a problem statement. That's broad. I need to do some digging. How am I do the digging? Well, in data, right? Young people can buy vapes. That's getting me closer. So now I know it's not that they're necessarily sharing them. They might be, but I can see that they're buying them. But I can see specifically the retailers near the high school. Now we know what we need to address. And that's how we can start to change that environment. That doesn't mean that we don't do life skills training and curricula for students, but we do, in addition, we also say, okay, what's happening with those retailers near the high school? How do we change that environment? So let's look at a few scenarios. So vaping access is a problem. Students say they can purchase vapes in town, and the coalition already does some good classroom education. So we got that covered. That's the frog strategies. Those are individual. What access point would you address? So they say that retailers, yeah. So we know that we're going to address retailers because students are telling us. So in addition to doing the classroom education, we're going to also say, okay, we know that there's something going on with the retailers in town. But knowing that the retailers are the issue still isn't enough. And this is such a good example. Morgan, I believe we had this conversation last year in Tennessee. Um, the retailers, that tells me I know sort of the direction, but I still don't know. Are the retailers checking ID, but youth have really good fake IDs, which, by the way, is on the rise. There's a lot of really good fake IDs that even scanners aren't picking up sometimes. So that's a different local condition than the retailers are just, I don't care if kids are of age, I'm going to sell to them because I make money. Those are two. So we need to do a little bit more digging. So as we are really honing in on the environment, we need to know when and where. I know we did. When and where does access happen? Which retailers are involved? What verification or enforcement already exists? What would count as meaningful change? Like, what is it that we're trying to change? And whose experience would help us understand this pattern? And so, where do we get the answers to this? In our data. And so, once we dive into the data, then we know who needs to know what so we can change the local condition. Let's look at those 7 strategies. What skills do I need to enhance? How do I support them in their skills development? How do I make it easier for kids not to purchase? How do I change the consequences? How do I change the physical design of the environment? And how do I either enforce or pass a policy? So the local condition is that beautiful bridge between the problem and the effective action. And then it helps us align how in the environment can we align the right mix of strategies. So we don't just have educated youth, but in this case, we have educated youth that aren't able to get vape from retailers. That's an environmental approach. So in addressing the environment, we want to look at retail access, things like compliance, social access, or maybe even online access. And so we want to move beyond education to change the access point. Now, let me just stop here and say, what is easy about moving beyond education to address the access point?
Reframe that question.
What is easy about moving beyond education to addressing the access point? What makes it easy to go, okay, we need to do education, but we also need to look at those access points. What makes that easy for you?
If someone wants to come off mute, you can share that as well.
Parents usually tell you, yeah, I love that. Behave right. Look, yes, Alice, I love that. So we might be so the data is telling us the behavior is not changing.
Right.
So right, the behavior, it's not enough. We think about the dosage and think about your partners. Here's what I love about bringing your partners together with environmental strategies and your data, and it all culminates in that local condition. If I know that retail access is a problem, then how do I change the environment? Well, I need to connect with the business community. I need to connect with my law enforcement partners. Parents is going to be different. I might need to connect with the booster club. I might need to connect with the parents association. The schools are going to be a natural partner there, right? So it helps us also. What makes it easy is our partners at the table and listening sessions with you. So we dive in. It's really easy to keep a big problem like youth are vaping big. We can do education, but we're not going to change the environment unless we dive in and find out those access points and bring our partners to the table to say, how do we employ those environmental strategies so we create an environment where the easy choice is the healthy choice?
Dorothy, I was delivering a training yesterday with a gentleman by the name of Ivan Gizang, and he said something that I thought was so pertinent and I think has some real relevance here to this conversation. It really shifted me because what he really pointed out is that our goal is not merely to inform, to create awareness. Our goal is really to provide and create the environment where our young people can make informed choices.
Yes.
And in order to do that, in order to do that well, he really emphasized our understanding of their ecosystem, the ecosystem that reinforces the choices that they're making, whether healthy or unhealthy choices, right? And so understanding that ecosystem, trying to apply what it is that we're talking about so that their behavior change, their choices change. And so
Love it.
I think that's really what it is that we're talking about here.
It's brilliant. I love that because especially when we're looking at these high risk behaviors, there's always an element of choice, right? And then we look at things like trauma, and we look, sometimes unhealthy choices are comfortable for us if we've experienced trauma. And I love that. I think that's really important because we want people ultimately to make the healthy choice. But sometimes let's be honest, sometimes people want to make an unhealthy choice.
Yeah.
Like, and so if we are really
Like
working
that
on
cheesecake.
environments and
Yeah.
creating, then even if they want to make an unhealthy choice, they can't because the environment is healthy. And that's, I think, where I love that piece because like when my daughter said, even if I wanted to drink, I wouldn't, even if she wanted to make an unhealthy choice, she couldn't find it. That's the beautiful secret sauce of environmental strategies, right? Yes, and then we want to equip them with skills and support so that they make healthy choices. But y'all know, if you ever were a kid, have a kid, know a kid, there's a period of time where brains are not fully cooked yet. And high risk behaviors are just likely.
Yeah.
And so if we can create an environment where they can't get it, they can't do it, right? They can't use it. I love that. Yeah. And so I love this chart, thinking about the continuum. What individual strategies do we want to do? What environmental strategies that aren't going to take up policy? And then what policy? So here we see, looking at the vaping issue, schoolations, parents, and youth education. We want to look at retail compliance. There's already a law for that. We don't need to pass it. School and policy enforcement, online age checks, maybe for the online piece. Over here, we see then could we do zoning changes? Could we change the delivery rules for the online piece or ID and licensing rules? So it's a continuum. I honestly do love this chart. I've used this with coalitions. So when you identify your local condition, it's just another way of looking at it is what are my individual strategies? What are my environmental strategies? What are my policy strategies? And I'm going to say, we want to plan comprehensively with this chart, even if we're not ready to do some zoning laws. But we want to know what the end game is, right? So we can see how we're moving. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And it may take building capacity and community readiness and building partnerships with the city council or the county board before we're ready for those zoning laws. But we still want to know what the end game is. So I love looking at it comprehensively. Let's play with another scenario. So this one, and okay, I saw there's some folks from New Jersey on the call. This one actually is one that we discussed in New Jersey not too long ago. Home delivery expands. Partners hear that some drivers are leaving alcohol without checking ID in that home delivery. No one knows how often it's happening. All right. What changed when the point of sale moved? All right. So tell me what the problem is here. If this is happening in your community, this is a real scenario I've worked with communities on, is we know that alcohol is being left without looking for that ID check. What's now changed? This is a new condition in the community. Tell me a little bit what changed in this community that may have changed the face of alcohol access for youth. And I'd also be interested, is this something that you know of in your community, or is it something, there's a lot of states that deliver alcohol. Yeah, so I love that. It looks like delivery drivers are not held to the same standards as regular retails. So expansion of home delivery of alcohol has happened. And are they checking IDs? Who's monitoring it? Like what's happening with this? Like, and who's responsible? Is it the delivery company? Is it Dorothy's Delivery, or is it the retailer that sells it to the delivery? There's like, what's going on here? All we know is it's increasing access, but something in the environment has changed. So what would you do first? And yes, and you know what, Diane, that's a really good, and at least it's like the Wild West. Yeah. So where do we start? So what would you do first? Would you verify where the breakdown occurs? So, yeah. Okay. See, this is, and I do think the onslaught for this was COVID, right? The onslaught for this was COVID, and it's almost like for lack of a better term, Carlton, it in many communities, it's a COVID hangover, right? Like it started during COVID, and then did we forget about it? But so what would we look at? Where we need to verify where the breakdown occurs. We need to identify who controls the ID. And we want to think about testing one environmental policy. Which one would you? So Alice said, can we do all at once? So we want to do B. Alice wants to do all three at once. I'm going to say that's a capacity thing. Definitely we want to verify where the breakdown occurs, because that's going to help us then identify what strategies that we need to employ. Yep. A. So yeah, I love this. We do want to get to all three, right? But we need to make sure that we verify where the breakdown occurs, because that's going to help us then identify where do we need to change the environment. So let's take a look at this one. Here's where we may want to get to. Here's our continuum. We want to look at public awareness. So do parents know that, when they go away for the weekend, they may have locked up their liquor cabinet. They may have somebody checking in on the kids, on Sunday morning, but they have no idea that when the kids order from Dorothy's Delivery, the kids can get a box of beer without being asked for an ID. So we need to do some public awareness, driver training, parent education. Then we want to look at what laws are in place and are they complying? Like, is the system, and it just happened in Mississippi, and that websites are not checking ID. So we want to verify what's happening in the environment first, and then we want to align the right environmental and policy approaches. So maybe there's delivery ID rules. Maybe we work at licensing conditions so that retailers have a point of checking with the delivery drivers, or there's some sort of system in place that they're requiring the delivery drivers to then do an ID check. And then consequences for non-compliance. So we want to look to move across the continuum. We want to make sure we've got all of these levels covered: individual, frog, environmental, and policy, pond. How are we identifying first that local condition? Because the local condition helps us hone in on what piece of the environment that we change. Let's look at this one. A community festival. So we see some alcohol sponsors that are the banners are greeting folks right at the entrance. Beer is sold throughout the grounds. Temporary servers are receiving no training. Some just good volunteers are saying, sure, I'll serve the alcohol. And then the youth activities are sitting right beside the alcohol area. What are some problems that you see in scenario 3? What are some problems that you might see? I'm going to tell you, there was just a community festival in my community this week, and all 3 of these were actually in existence all at the same time. What are some problems here? What do you see?
They're typing.
Lack of training. All right. So we see that we don't have servers that are trained. So are they over serving? Do they even know how to check ID? Contradictory actions versus messaging. So the norms in the community are sending some unhealthy messages. Yeah, norms to kids, easy, pushing alcohol as soon as they enter. That's promotion, right? Yes. So we're looking at promotion and easy access. Yes. Those are all, and this is not a risk factor training, but we can't get to environmental strategies if we don't look at the risk factors in the environment, right? So we're looking at things like access. We're looking at community norms. We're looking at things like messaging. We're looking at things like responsible beverage server training. So lack of education on the server's part. So that's what we're looking at. And I'm going to say, yeah, that norm that places activities for youth beside the activity, that means, what that tells me is alcohol is so normalized in this community, they're not even aware that they're presenting negative messages by having the youth activities right beside the alcohol area. I've seen it over and over. That's a strong community norm that not only promotes the use of alcohol, it condones the use of alcohol. So here's what you guys just described. We want to look at the environment. What is the environment telling us? It's saying, how easy is alcohol to get? What's dominating here? The signage. What are the servers doing? What seems routine? Who is responsible? So is the environment telling us? What might be some good strategies at the individual, the environmental, and the policy level that would address this hot mess of a scenario that probably happens in more communities than not? What would be some individual, environmental, or policy? Just tell me some strategies that you would employ in this scenario. I know y'all typing. So we're gonna move. I love that, Michelle. We're gonna move the area for alcohol. So that is going to be, we're going to change the physical design of the environment. That is an environmental strategy. It doesn't mean we necessarily have to implement a policy. We're going to have different sponsorships. So we're going to reduce promotion. We are going to do responsible beverage server training. They're coming in faster that I can see them. We're going to change availability. Yes, Carlton.
Less promotion, a beer garden location with trained servers, law enforcement presence, and kids with area with no promotion.
You know what I saw there? That was a beautiful hearty list of environmental strategies. And certainly education is going to be in there, right? We might have to educate the community sponsors why they need to do responsible beverage server training, right? We might need to educate them why promotion of alcohol at the entrance is probably not. So education tills the soil, but what you guys just brought us to was we clarified what's happening in the environment, and you just came up with a long list of environmental strategies. And so we don't want to just do one. We want to look at how do we change all of the elements in the environment so that we create an environment where the easy choice is the healthy choice. Love that. What might be some individual strategies? I don't want to underscore the importance of environmental strategies. What individual strategies though might we also want to? I talked about educating the
Servers.
the servers and educating the folks that host the community event. Who else might need some education? We still want to do some individual strategies. Yeah, we want to parents. Yes, we still want to educate parents. We still teaching youth. Yes, 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 yes. Parents, if they come with kids, yes. Look at that. We still want to do that education piece. We still want kids to have those refusal skills. We still want to do that education for parents about, you don't need to. One of these, I'm going to tell you, can I tell you, this is one of these things that just gets stuck in my craw. I see this in so many communities that I could have put this in this scenario that parents go, oh, some of my close friends that I think are the greatest parents in the world shock me with this one. They'll say, Carlton, can't wait till my kids become 16 because then they can be my designated driver.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
We still need to educate those parents. That ain't healthy.
Yeah.
We still need to educate those parents, but we also want to change the environment, right? Heck, that's what we want to do. It'd be perfect if the kids don't even have to see the alcohol environment at the festival. And the other thing I'm going to say is sometimes we don't recognize that we have a lot of folks. I know it's so wrong on so many levels. Don't get me started, Marie. The other thing that I think about, we're looking through the lens of prevention, but I would be remiss if I didn't say we have a lot of folks that are in recovery. And we want to make sure that the easy choice is the healthy choice for folks in long-term recovery. And wouldn't it be nice if we lived in a world where somebody could go to a community event and enjoy the event without being slapped in the face with alcohol, advertising and alcohol throughout the event? So it's creating a healthy environment for youth, but it's also creating a healthy environment for any number of folks in the community. It just creates a healthier environment if we look at how we change this. Right? We don't need to educate folks in recovery why they don't need to engage in alcohol. They know that, but we can support that and cultivate a healthy environment by looking at these environmental strategies. So what would change in the environment? So you guys mentioned all of this was great. We're going to move sponsor placement. That's changing the physical design of the environment. We're going to change where and when alcohol is sold. We're going to put it in a different area. That is also changing the physical design. And it's also creating a barrier. When I'm looking at the 7 strategies, when I think about enhancing access, reducing barrier, in my mind, I say, how do I make it? Chuck E. Cheese sells beer?
Wow.
No. Okay. So that could be a scenario. We need to unpack that one. There's a whole lot to talk about with the Chuck E. Cheese, but
It's been a while since I've been to Chuck E. Cheese.
I know. I can't
It just
imagine
seems-
anything worse than being at Chuck E. Cheese other than being at Chuck E. Cheese and being intoxicated. Like, I can't imagine. Oh, okay, that one. That's crazy. But I think about these 7 strategies for community change, right? Think about, we want to change where and when alcohol is served. So if we put up a barrier, that's changing the physical design, but it's also putting up a barrier. When I think about enhancing access or reducing barriers, the way I think about it is, how do I make it easier to do the behavior that I want to happen? Or how do I make it harder for the behavior that I'm trying to change to happen? So if we move alcohol, it's going to make it harder for kids to get it, right? If kids are able to, if the alcohol is happening throughout the event, Carlton, can buy some beers and pass it to 16-year-old Dorothy as we're walking through the event. Ooh, but if now we have trained our servers, we've moved the alcohol to a fenced off area, it's not going to be easy for Carlton to pass that alcohol to 16-year-old Dorothy, is it? Right. So it's going to create a barrier, and it's going to change the physical design of the environment. Now, even if 16-year-old Dorothy wants some beer, she can't get it. Ergo, the easy choice is the healthy choice. And in this scenario, the only choice for Dorothy is the healthy choice. I'll take it. And then we also want to look at, how do we work with our partners in law enforcement to do patrols? Well, I'll tell you one thing, it's going to be easier for law enforcement with their limited resources to patrol if it's in a fenced off area than if it's throughout the event. So it's making it easier for all of our partners to change the environment. And so that is why environmental strategies are that secret sauce for us. And I'm going to say, Carlton, this is the beautiful role of a coalition.
Yeah.
Is our partners are doing the education in this, our partner, but together collectively we say, what's happening in the pond and how do we all work together? Because there's not one agency or organization that is single-handedly looking at what's happening in the pond. Collectively, we're coming together as a group of agencies. Schools are still going to do education. Public health is still going to do education and outreach. Healthcare facilities are still going to do their early intervention and their screening and brief intervention and referral to treatment. And what we're going to do collectively as a coalition is saying, okay, we got all these pieces in place. We've got some healthy frogs. How do we create an environment where we make sure that the easy choice is the healthy choice, that people, and that's where the coalitions, that's that beautiful piece of the collective impact of coalitions.
Yeah.
Love it.
I was going to say that it's in fact the only way it happens, right? It's our true mission here is, how do we enlist the entire community as allies in this effort to change and create an environment where everyone can make the healthy choice, the informed choice, the better choice.
And I love that. And the other thing, as you were saying that, Carlton, that is really important too, is norms.
Yeah.
Is if we can create an environment where
Where you
it's
can't
not
sell
normalized,
alcohol at Chuck E. Cheese,
yeah, then people are going to be like, instead of I need alcohol at Chuck E. Cheese, people are going to be like, why the heck would we have alcohol at Chuck E. Cheese? And that's a fundamental difference, right? So I was working in a community not too long ago where alcohol is everywhere, and they realized that they couldn't change everything all at once. So what they worked, hand to God, this is true. So the local condition that they decided was, they were going to try to have work with community partners to close the bars at the T-ball games on Saturday morning, because they were like, okay, we can't change everything, but maybe if we change this and try to convince people you don't need to drink at the T-ball game on Saturday morning, that we would start to change that community norm. And that's really important too. And that's what I also love about environmental strategies is, and people sometimes say, I sometimes have folks get mad at me. Well, Dorothy, when I'll say, clarify the local condition, well, they'll be like, well, they're drinking everywhere. Okay, tell me where. They're drinking in the park. They're drinking in the parking lot at school. We change one local condition and then another local condition and another local condition. And what starts to change is we start to see this snowball effect, and the community starts to take a look around and say, what the heck were we doing all this for? And the community is better and it's healthier, and there's less calls to service, and there's less parents that are getting kids coming home inebriated, and there's less athlete violations. The community starts to function better. And so what happens is we start to challenge and change those norms. And then the community, because you know what? It doesn't mean, no matter how good any y'all are, Morgan, I know you're a great coordinator, you can't change the community on its own. The community has to change the community. And that's why these environmental strategies, they sort of help to start that snowball of changing our norms in the community. So here's just another way of looking. We talked through, we got one more scenario. Here's what you all talked about: messaging, server training, youth campaigns, parent campaigns. We didn't have room on the slide. Then we looked at how we're going to do sponsor play. You identified all of these across that continuum. Last scenario, we'll go through it quick. Hemp-derived drinks sit beside energy drink and candy. I'm going to tell you, I've done a few scans in a few states. There are a lot of states where these drinks are everywhere. Bright packaging and 2 for $5. And you may not even know that they have THC in them. We did Carlton, I was working with a coalition. We were doing a presentation for teachers talking about THC derived drinks, and the teacher was drinking one. They had no idea that the energy drink that they'd picked up on the way to school had THC in it.
Yeah.
So the clerk doesn't even know what the policy is. All right. So tell me a little bit about what we want to clarify in this scenario. What do I want to look at in this scenario? And I want to look through this through a specific lens in a minute, but I want to hear from you first. What do we want? What's the problem in this area? What do we want to clarify? What do we want to learn more? We know this is the problem. What else do we need to know before we can start jumping into environmental strategies? What do you see here? Price and promote. Amy, you set me up beautifully. Price and promotion, placement, education around hemp. Yes. Placement products. This group, I'm going to tell you, the Southeast PTTC region has the brightest group of preventionists I've ever seen, because what y'all just talked about was the 4 Ps. I love the 4 Ps, and I wanted to do, you guys are talking about, yes, look at that, the 4 Ps. The 4 Ps is a great way for us to look at how we can identify what's happening in our community, and they lead us to environmental strategies. And so for those of you that said education, 1000%, it's always an and, not an either or. And look at this. We described the product. So what does the product look like? What is the potency? What is the packaging? The placement, where is it placed? The promotion, how what is the claim? So is it an energy drink? We see this commonly with this particular line of substances, that it's an energy drink, that it's a health drink. Is it sponsoring events, and price? So looking at that, I'm going to go back here. So we've got hemp derived drinks sitting beside energy drinks and candy. So that is product placement. We see bright packaging, right? And we've got a promotion. We've got a clerk that is unsure, so we need some education there. We also look at those product, place, promotion, and price. You often hear the 4 Ps in our work, and the 4 Ps, Carlton, are one of my favorite ways of leading us to get to environmental strategies. So what would be some strategies in this last scenario that you guys could think of that we would employ to change the fact that in community ABC, we got hemp drinks, they're brightly packaged, they're on sale, the clerk doesn't know much about these drinks. What are some strategies that we would do, both individual and environmental and policy? Train the clerk, so responsible beverage server training, yes. Transparency and labeling, so we would change the packaging. We would look at policy with, so we would not, I love that. We would not just do responsible beverage server training or training, whatever that looks like. And some RBS has been adapted for additional products. We would have a policy that is required. We would move the products. What else did I miss, Carlton?
Educate retailers on the difference and educate the community that they are being sold
Yes.
near other products.
Yes. You guys just described that continuum, I, E, and P. So what we wanted to do is we want to change the product, right? We want to clarify the form and educate about youth development. Yes, look at all this beautiful. You guys are just doing this whole continuum. We want to move the products. We want to say to the retailers, you do not need to offer discounts, and they do not need to be beside the other drinks that folks are getting. And we want to make sure that the clerks know what they're selling to whom. So we've just described, I keep using this because these are the 7 strategies, again, are used as a unit map to a local condition. Right. And so we have been really clear through these scenarios. We want to clarify the local condition. We want to identify, once we identify those risk factors, price, promotion, norms, accessibility, availability, what the right strategies are to do to change the environment related to that local condition. The local condition, I'm going to say it one more time. The local condition is the bridge between the data, what the data are telling us, and what the effective strategies are to change the environment. And so I'm going to go back to think about your own work. And in your mind's eye, if Dorothy were to say, well, tell me what the local condition that your coalition is working on, would you say kids are vaping? Or would you say our data told us that retailers are not able to check IDs because they don't know how to read the IDs? The local condition is kids are getting. That's a local condition. We're working on vape as a problem. And so here's the thing. If we keep a problem big, all we can do is education and awareness. All we can do, because we don't know what the behavior is that's happening, right? The behavior is what's going to lead us to the environmental strategies. Now, that education is important. It's going to lay the foundation. It's going to till the soil. But we need to have that local condition because it's the bridge between what the data are telling us is happening and how we change the environment. So think about the work you're doing and can you identify the local condition you're working on? If you can't, my prayer for your community is that you look at some data and you clarify within the problem, what is the local condition that we're working on? And then how do we change that specific environment? That's where you get to environmental strategies. You guys came up with more strategies than I did, but here's that continuum again. We want to look at youth education. So we did those. You guys listed these off. We want to do the environmental strategies, which are changing the environment that don't require a policy. And then we want to look at how do we change the policies as well. I love this way of looking at it. We want to make sure we've got the individual, the environment, and the policy. So you'll see that, again, hierarchy is not in existence here. This is a continuum. And so if your coalition says, I'm not quite ready for policy, that does not mean you're not ready for environmental change. And it doesn't mean you're not ready to identify what policies, even if it takes you a minute to build readiness to get there. Sorry, Dorothy, for all the times Alice, love ya. There was a little history there. No, right? That's why we focus.
This has all been for you, Alice.
That's why we focus on look. I learned the term local condition from Carlton Hall, and it's life-changing. It really is, right? Honestly, if you take nothing else from this session, what is the local condition you're working on? And there's no wrong answers. If you're working on underage drinking, unpack it. There's a local condition in there. If you're looking on kids are getting alcohol, unpack it. There's local conditions in there. Unpack it because that local condition is the bridge between what the problem is and how you move to environmental strategies. So thinking about here's the thing about partners. Here's the thing about partners is once we get to the local conditions, we can start to see who the natural partners are to change the environment. So if our problem is that kids are stealing medications from medicine cabinets at home, I know I want to work with my prescribers. I know I want to work with my dispensers, my pharmacists. I don't need to necessarily work with law enforcement on that. They're for take back events, sure, but we can see the natural partners. So thinking about once you clarify your local condition, who are the partners I need to engage so we can do those environmental strategies and the individual strategies? Oh, I love that. It's the Rosetta Stone of it is. It's understanding those local conditions. Local conditions will give you environmental strategies. It's not magic. If we're too broad, where we stop is those individual strategies, which we know are important, but they're not going to get us where we need to go. So thinking about your local condition, then thinking about your partners. In my mind's eye, when I work with coalitions and we start to identify local conditions, those partners start to like pop into my head. Like I start to think about who I need to talk to about what. And that's where we can really mobilize our coalitions. Just like Carlton said, environmental strategies can't happen without coalitions because this is collective impact. All right. We are coming to the end of our time together. Salvador, it's getting an act. That's exactly what it is. That it's not like that's exactly, it's getting an accurate diagnosis of the problem so we know where we can change the environment. That's it. So where are you now? Environmental strategies are still mostly new to me. Let's see if we've maybe even moved up a little bit. I understand the idea, but need more practice applying it. I use environmental strategies in some of my work, and I'm comfortable helping others apply environmental strategies. I love that. 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 Do not be scared of this work because Lord knows we are all in it together. Love it. You guys have been, thank you so much. Your fingers must be sore from using the chat box. I certainly appreciate it. Here's my last thought as you're taking it back. So name the local condition. Think about what am I working on? Can I name that local condition? That's magic, my friends. Keep up the good work. I did this. Last thing I'll say, Carlton, is I was doing a training, and at the end of the training, this young man from California looked at me, and he literally had heads in his hands, and he said, "With everything I've learned this week, Dorothy, my coalition is really broken." And I said, "No, it's not. Wherever your coalition is perfect. Like it's taking it from here to the next. So wherever you are, you're doing good work, period. Name the local condition, take your work to the next level, or clarify that local condition, or discuss that local condition with your coalition. If it's on y'all's logic model and you haven't looked at your logic model, pull out the logic model, talk about the local condition. Move across that continuum and use the individual environmental policy. For me, that's just an easy way of looking at it. Bring in the people who can change it. So once you clarify the local condition, think about it. One condition, one question, what is it we need to change? One partner at a time. And with that, my friend Carlton, I'm going to say it's over to you.